Miss, you need to move. This seat isn't for people like you.
Rebecca Walsh's voice cut through the champagne-scented air of Skyline Airways' first-class cabin like a verdict. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't apologizing. Standing over seat 1A in her crisp navy uniform, she delivered the words like company policy, loud, certain, and final. 20-year-old Naomi Brooks looked up from her Stanford University sweatshirt and worn jeans, her noise-canceling headphones sliding down around her neck. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't raised her voice or caused a scene. She was simply existing in a space where her presence was apparently a problem. "Excuse me," Naomi said calmly, though her heart began to race. Rebecca's smile was sharp as broken glass. "There's been a booking error. This section requires verification. We have a lovely seat for you in Economy Plus." The words hung in the perfumed air like smoke from a house fire. Around them, the first-class cabin of Flight 447 buzzed with the quiet energy of departure preparations. Leather seats that cost more than most people's monthly rent gleamed under soft lighting. Crystal champagne flutes waited on polished tray tables. The Boeing 7879 Dreamliner represented the pinnacle of luxury air travel, and Naomi Brooks had paid $7,200 to be here. She had every right to be here. But Rebecca Walsh had already decided otherwise. "I have my boarding pass," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "The seat was purchased 3 days ago." She reached for her phone, pulling up the confirmation email with its unmistakable Skyline Airways logo and seat assignment 1, a premium first suite. Rebecca didn't even glance at the screen. Payment verification is required for this tier of service. There have been issues with certain bookings today. The pause before certain said everything that Rebecca's professional training wouldn't let her say explicitly. But the message was clear as glass. Young black women didn't belong in first class unless someone made a mistake. From seat 2C, Dr. Sarah Martinez looked up from her medical journal. She was a cardiologist returning home to London after a conference in New York, and she recognized the tone Rebecca was using. It was the same tone she'd heard in medical school when professors questioned whether she truly belonged in the program. "Is there a problem?" Dr. Martinez asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Rebecca turned, her smile brightening artificially. "Nothing that can't be resolved quickly, doctor. Just a small seating arrangement issue, but it wasn't small, and everyone in the vicinity knew it." Preston Vale emerged from the men's lavatory, adjusting his Hermes tie and checking his Patek Philippe watch. At 52, he commanded boardrooms across 3 continents and hadn't heard the word no in any context for at least a decade. His pharmaceutical empire had made him worth somewhere north of $800 million, and he expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. "What's the delay?" Preston asked, his voice carrying the impatience of someone whose time was measured in 6-figure increments per hour. "Just resolving a seating issue, Mr. Vale," Rebecca replied, her demeanor shifting to something approaching reverence. "We'll have you in 1A momentarily." That's when the pieces clicked into place. Naomi wasn't being moved because of a computer error or verification issue. She was being moved because Preston Vale wanted her seat, and the crew had decided that his comfort mattered more than her paid reservation. "I'm not moving," Naomi said quietly, but her words carried across the cabin like a bell. "I paid for this seat. I have the receipt. If Mr. Vale has an issue with his seat, you can offer him the economy plus accommodation you just offered me." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Preston's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Sweetheart, I don't think you understand how this works. Some passengers have priority." Priority based on what Naomi asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Payment. Because I paid for this seat. Status. I'm a Stanford student returning to Oxford University. Or are you talking about a different kind of priority?" She didn't say the words explicitly, but everyone understood exactly what kind of priority she meant. Rebecca's professional mask began to slip. "Young lady, you're creating a scene. This aircraft needs to push back on schedule and you're disrupting federal flight operations." "I'm sitting quietly in the seat I purchased," Naomi replied. "The only disruption I see is someone trying to remove a paying passenger to accommodate someone else's preference." From across the aisle, James Patterson lowered his Wall Street Journal. As an investment banker, he'd seen his share of power plays, but this felt different. This felt wrong. He glanced at his phone, checking to see if anyone else was recording what was happening. Dr. Martinez was already ahead of him. Her phone was positioned discreetly, camera rolling, capturing every word of the exchange. Captain Rodriguez appeared from the cockpit, his 4 gold stripes catching the overhead lighting. He was a man who had flown for Skyline Airways for 15 years, and he prided himself on running efficient operations. Problems got solved quickly and quietly on his aircraft. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of ultimate responsibility for the flight. "Passenger in 1A is refusing to comply with crew instructions." Rebecca set her tone, suggesting this was a matter of aviation security rather than customer preference. Captain Rodriguez looked at Naomi, taking in her calm posture, her hands folded in her lap, her quiet dignity in the face of increasing pressure. She didn't look like someone causing a disturbance. She looked like someone being disturbed. "Miss, I'm going to need you to follow crew instructions," he said, though his tone was less aggressive than Rebecca's. "We have schedule pressures, and passenger cooperation is essential for safe operations," Captain Naomi said respectfully. "I understand your position, but I'm not disrupting anything. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for, and I haven't violated any federal aviation regulations. The only instruction I've received is to move to accommodate another passenger's preference, which isn't the same as a safety requirement." Preston stepped forward, his impatience boiling over. "Look, Captain, I have a merger meeting tomorrow morning that's worth more than this girl makes in a lifetime. Just move her to coach and let's get this plane in the air." The casual dismissal in his voice, this girl landed like a slap across the cabin. Dr. Martinez winced. James Patterson shook his head. Even some passengers who hadn't been paying attention looked up at the naked condescension. "I have a name," Naomi said quietly. "It's Naomi Brooks, and I'm not moving." Rebecca's patience evaporated entirely. "Fine. Captain, I'm formally requesting security assistance. We have a passenger refusing to comply with lawful crew instructions." Captain Rodriguez hesitated. In 15 years of flying, he'd never had to remove a passenger from first class for refusing to give up a paid seat. The situation felt unprecedented, and his training didn't cover how to handle precedent-breaking discrimination disguised as policy enforcement. "Security will be here shortly," he announced, then retreated toward the cockpit to radio ground control. Naomi felt her mouth go dry, but she kept her hands steady. She thought about her father, Andre Brooks, who had taught her that dignity was not negotiable, that respect was not a favor to be granted or withdrawn based on someone else's comfort level. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, looking directly at Rebecca. "All of you." Preston smirked. "The only mistake here is thinking you belong in first class." From the galley area, Lisa Reyes watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. As a junior flight attendant and one of the few Hispanic employees on the crew, she had experienced her own share of workplace bias. She knew exactly what she was witnessing, but speaking up meant risking her job. Dr. Martinez, meanwhile, had seen enough. She stood up, her medical authority lending weight to her presence. "This is discrimination," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the first-class cabin. "This young woman has done nothing wrong. She's sitting quietly in a seat she paid for. What you're doing is illegal and it's being recorded." She held up her phone, making it clear that everything was being documented. Rebecca's face flushed. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "Discrimination always concerns me," Dr. Martinez replied, "especially when it's this blatant. James Patterson stood as well. "Doctor's right. This is wrong." The girl paid for her seat, but Preston wasn't backing down. "Oh, please. This is about priority status and operational efficiency. Don't make this about something it's not. Then explain to me." Naomi said, her voice still calm despite the storm building around her, exactly what operational efficiency requires, removing a seated passenger to accommodate someone else's seating preference. Preston's face reddened. "Because some passengers matter more than others?" The words hung in the air like a confession. Dr. Martinez's phone captured every syllable. The cabin door opened and 2 airport security officers stepped aboard. Officer Williams, a large man with 20 years of experience, and Officer Thompson, his younger partner, approached with the weary confidence of people who dealt with difficult passengers daily. "What's the situation?" Officer Williams asked Rebecca. "Passenger in 1A refusing to follow crew instructions." Rebecca replied, her version of events stripped of all context. "Disrupting flight operations." Officer Thompson looked at Naomi, taking in her calm demeanor, her respectful posture, her quiet dignity. She didn't look disruptive. She looked scared but determined. "Miss, I need you to gather your belongings and come with us," Officer Williams said, his tone suggesting this was non-negotiable. Officer Naomi said carefully, "What law have I broken? What regulation have I violated? I'm sitting in a seat I paid for, and I haven't threatened anyone or disrupted anything." "You're disrupting the flight by refusing crew instructions," Officer Thompson said, though he sounded less certain than his partner. "The instruction was to move to economy to make room for another passenger's preference," Naomi replied. "That's not the same as a safety instruction, and you know it." Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "Officers, I'm a physician, and I've been watching this entire incident. This young woman has been completely compliant and respectful. She's being removed because of her race, not because of any safety issue." "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Williams said, but his tone was uncertain. The situation was more complicated than the simple passenger removal he'd expected. Preston, sensing the momentum shifting against him, decided to escalate. "Look, I don't care what this is about. I need that seat. I have status with this airline, and I want her removed. Now." His naked entitlement cut through any remaining ambiguity about what was really happening. Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to her contacts and found the one labeled Dad. Her finger hovered over the call button. "You can remove me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. "You can drag me off this plane if that's what you want to do. But you should know that this is being recorded and this won't end here." She pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice that could move mountains answered. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Naomi Brooks really was, and more importantly, who her father was. Naomi had grown up in the suburbs of Detroit in a modest brick house that sat exactly where middle-class respectability met upper-middle-class ambition. Her father, Andre Brooks, had purchased that house when Naomi was 7 years old, after his aviation company's first major contract had finally proven that a black man from the projects could build something that mattered. The house had 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a 2-car garage that Andre never quite filled because he was always traveling, always working, always building the empire that would eventually span 3 continents and employ over 15,000 people. But when he was home, Andre made sure that Naomi understood exactly who she was and exactly what she was worth. "Baby girl," he would say, sitting on her bed at night when she came home crying about something that had happened at school. "The world is going to try to make you smaller than you are. It's going to try to convince you that you don't belong in rooms you paid to enter. Your job is to take up every inch of space you've earned and never apologize for it." When Naomi was 12, they had gone to dinner at an expensive restaurant in downtown Detroit to celebrate her acceptance into the gifted and talented program at school. The hostess had looked at Andre's jeans and polo shirt and suggested they might be more comfortable at the casual dining establishment down the street. Andre had smiled politely, handed her his American Express black card, and said, "We'll take the table we reserved, please." They sat in the most expensive booth in the restaurant, ordered the most expensive items on the menu, and Andre left a tip that was larger than most people's car payments. Not because he was trying to prove anything, but because he wanted Naomi to see what quiet dignity looked like under pressure. "Never let them see you sweat," he told her over dessert. "Never let them see you break. Take up your space and make them adjust to you." By the time Naomi turned 18, Andre's company Brooks Aviation Holdings had grown from a small aircraft leasing operation to one of the largest aviation investment firms in North America. They owned aircraft that flew for Delta, American United, and dozens of smaller carriers. They leased jets to Fortune 500 companies, provided financing for airline expansion, and consulted on aviation projects from Sao Paulo to Singapore. Andre had started with nothing. Born in the Brewster Projects in Detroit, raised by a grandmother who cleaned office buildings to keep food on the table, he had learned early that respect was something you earned through excellence, not something given through inheritance. At 18, Andre had enlisted in the Air Force, where he learned aircraft maintenance and developed an understanding of aviation that would serve him for the rest of his life. After his discharge, he worked as a baggage handler at Detroit Metropolitan Airport while taking night classes in business and aviation management. The other baggage handlers thought he was crazy studying spreadsheets and aircraft specifications during his lunch breaks, but Andre understood something that they didn't. Every plane that landed represented an opportunity, and every opportunity was a door that could be opened with the right combination of knowledge, timing, and relentless work ethic. His first major break came when he noticed that a regional airline was struggling with maintenance costs on their aging fleet. Andre approached them with a proposal his company would purchase their older aircraft, refurbish them to like-new condition, and lease them back at rates that were lower than their current maintenance expenses. The airline executives initially laughed at the young black man with the ambitious proposal, but Andre's numbers were flawless. His maintenance projections were conservative and his financing was solid. 6 months later, Brooks Aviation Holdings owned its first aircraft. 25 years later, Andre's company owned or held leases on over 200 aircraft worldwide, with a combined value exceeding $2 billion. But despite his success, Andre never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because of how he looked. He made sure Naomi never forgot either. When Naomi was 16, she had been shopping at an upscale mall in Birmingham, Michigan, using her father's credit card to buy clothes for school. The sales associate had watched her like a hawk, following her around the store, asking repeatedly if she was sure the card was hers. Finally, the woman had called security, claiming the card might be stolen. Naomi had called her father, crying and embarrassed. Andre had arrived at the store within 20 minutes, accompanied by the general manager of the mall, the regional manager of the store chain, and a lawyer. By the time he was finished, the sales associate was unemployed. The store had implemented new training protocols for all employees, and Naomi had received written apologies from 3 levels of corporate management. But more importantly, Andre had made sure that Naomi understood the lesson. "Baby girl," he said. As they walked back to his car, they apologized because I had power, not because they were wrong. The wrong part was obvious from the beginning. The apology only came when they realized there would be consequences. Your job is to make sure there are always consequences. Now at 20 years old, Naomi was a junior at Stanford University, majoring in international relations with a focus on economic policy. She had spent the past semester at Oxford University as part of an exchange program studying European approaches to aviation regulation and transportation policy. She was brilliant, driven, and quietly confident in a way that made professors take notice and classmates seek her out for study groups. She spoke 3 languages fluently, played violin at a near-professional level, and had already been accepted to law school at Harvard, Yale, and Stanford for after graduation. But despite her accomplishments, despite her father's success, despite the fact that she had grown up in a world where money was never a concern and opportunities were always available, Naomi had never forgotten that the world still saw her as a young black woman first, and everything else second. She had learned to navigate predominantly white spaces with the same quiet dignity her father had taught her. She dressed carefully, spoke precisely, and carried herself with a confidence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. But she also understood that none of those things guaranteed that she would be treated with respect. That's why she always documented everything. That's why she always stayed calm under pressure. And that's why she always called her father when situations escalated beyond her control. Andre Brooks was currently in the boardroom of a major airline manufacturer in Seattle, negotiating a contract that would add 50 aircraft to his company's portfolio. The meeting represented potential profits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and it had taken 6 months to arrange. But when his phone rang and he saw Naomi's name on the caller ID, everything else became secondary. Andre had built his empire on 2 fundamental principles. Family came first, and dignity was non-negotiable. Those principles had guided every major decision of his life, from the contracts he signed, to the employees he hired, to the values he instilled in his daughter. He had taught Naomi that money was just a tool, power was just leverage, and success was just protection. But respect, real respect based on character rather than appearance, that was something you had to fight for every single day. Now, as his phone rang in that Seattle boardroom, Andre Brooks was about to discover just how much fight was required. Meanwhile, back on Flight 447, Rebecca Walsh was operating from her own set of experiences and biases. Rebecca had been a flight attendant for Skyline Airways for 15 years, working her way up from economy class to the premium cabins where tips were better and passengers were supposedly more civilized. She prided herself on maintaining standards on providing service that matched the premium prices that first-class passengers paid. But Rebecca's understanding of standards was complicated by unconscious biases that she had never examined or acknowledged. In her mind, first-class passengers looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, and carried themselves with a certain bearing that she recognized and respected. When she saw young people in casual clothes in first class, her immediate assumption was that they were using employee passes or upgrade certificates or some other arrangement that hadn't actually cost them the full price of the premium experience. She wasn't consciously racist, but her definition of belongs here was shaped by 15 years of serving passengers who were overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly middle-aged, and overwhelmingly male. Preston Vale represented everything Rebecca understood about first-class service. He was a regular customer, a high-status frequent flyer, and a man who tipped well and demanded excellence. When he expressed dissatisfaction with his seat assignment, Rebecca's instinct was to solve his problem as quickly and efficiently as possible. The fact that solving Preston's problem required displacing a young black woman didn't register as problematic in Rebecca's mind. It registered as operational efficiency. Captain Rodriguez, meanwhile, was caught between competing pressures that his training hadn't adequately prepared him to handle. He had been taught to support his crew to maintain schedule integrity and to resolve conflicts quickly and quietly. But he had also been taught that passenger safety and passenger rights were paramount, and nothing about Naomi's behavior suggested she posed any kind of safety risk. She was calm, respectful, and completely compliant with actual aviation regulations. The problem was that Rebecca had framed the situation as a crew authority issue, rather than what it actually was, a discrimination issue disguised as customer service. As the security officers prepared to remove Naomi from her seat, and as Preston Vale checked his watch with increasing impatience, and as Dr. Martinez continued recording everything on her phone, none of them had any idea that they were about to make one of the most expensive mistakes in aviation history. Because in that Seattle boardroom, Andre Brooks was looking at his phone, seeing his daughter's number, and preparing to stop everything he was doing to answer her call. And when Andre Brooks stopped everything to protect his daughter, the consequences reached far beyond a single airplane, a single route, or even a single airline. They were about to change everything. The phone in Andre's hand went straight to voicemail. On Flight 447, Naomi looked at her device with growing alarm as the call failed to connect. The aircraft's cellular service was already degrading as they prepared for departure, and she could see she was down to 1 bar. Having trouble reaching someone, Preston asked with obvious satisfaction, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before creating problems." Officer Williams stepped closer to Naomi's seat. "Miss, I need you to end the call and come with us. You're holding up this entire flight." "I'm not holding up anything," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're choosing to create a disturbance by trying to remove a passenger who's done nothing wrong." "Done nothing wrong!" Rebecca's voice was getting louder, and other passengers were beginning to turn in their seats. "You've refused direct instructions from the flight crew. That's a federal offense." No, Dr. Martinez interjected, still recording. "Refusing safety instructions is a federal offense. Refusing to give up a paid seat to accommodate someone else's preference is not." James Patterson nodded in agreement. "She's right. This isn't about safety. This is about customer service, and what you're doing is discrimination." Preston turned on both of them with barely contained rage. "This is about priority status and operational efficiency. Some passengers have earned preferential treatment through loyalty and spending. This girl is obviously using some kind of employee pass or mistake fare." This girl, Naomi, said quietly, "paid $7,200 for this seat 3 days ago. I have the receipt, the confirmation, and the credit card statement. What I don't have is any requirement to prove my worthiness to people who've already decided I don't belong here." Captain Rodriguez returned from the cockpit, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "We need to resolve this quickly. We're already behind schedule, and ground control is asking for our pushback status." "Then push back," Dr. Martinez said. "This passenger is seated and compliant. There's no reason she can't fly in the seat she purchased." "There's been a seating reassignment," Rebecca insisted. "Operational requirements necessitate passenger cooperation." "What operational requirement?" Naomi asked. "The only requirement I see is Mr. Vale's preference for my seat over his assigned seat." Preston's composure finally cracked completely. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know how you afforded that seat, but I guarantee you I've spent more money with this airline in the past year than you'll spend in your entire lifetime. My comfort and convenience matter more than your feelings." The casual cruelty of the statement seemed to echo through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Lisa Reyes, the junior flight attendant, moved closer to the galley, clearly torn between her job security and her conscience. "My feelings aren't the issue," Naomi replied. "My rights are, and my rights don't become less important because of how much money you've spent or how much you think you matter." Officer Thompson stepped forward, trying to project authority he wasn't entirely sure he possessed. "Ma'am, we've been called to resolve a disturbance. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can escalate this situation." "What situation?" Naomi asked, her voice still calm but growing stronger. "I'm sitting quietly in a seat I paid for. The only situation here is someone trying to remove me illegally." "It's not illegal," Officer Williams said, though he sounded less certain than he had when he'd first boarded. "The crew has authority over passenger seating." "For safety reasons," Dr. Martinez said loudly. "Not for preference reasons. What you're doing is illegal discrimination, and you're all complicit in it." Rebecca's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Doctor, I need you to return to your seat and stop interfering with crew operations. I'm not interfering. I'm witnessing, and I'm recording, and I'm going to make sure this doesn't disappear down some corporate memory hole." Preston checked his watch again with theatrical impatience. "Captain, I have a $1 billion merger meeting tomorrow morning. Every minute we waste on this nonsense costs real money. Just remove her and let's get this plane moving." Captain Rodriguez looked around the first-class cabin, taking in the faces of the other passengers, the phone cameras that were now openly recording, and the growing tension that was making his job significantly more complicated than usual. "Miss Brooks," he said finally, "I'm asking you one last time to cooperate with crew instructions. If you don't move voluntarily, we'll have to remove you." Naomi took a deep breath, thinking about everything her father had taught her about dignity under pressure. "Captain, I'm going to ask you one last time to think about what you're doing. You're removing a paying passenger who's done nothing wrong to accommodate another passenger's preference. You're doing it because you've made assumptions about who belongs in first class based on how we look and how we're dressed. And you're doing it with full knowledge that it's being recorded and documented." She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "I'm not going to resist. I'm not going to fight you. But I want everyone here to understand that what you're doing is wrong, and there will be consequences." The cabin fell silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft systems. Even Preston seemed momentarily subdued by the gravity in Naomi's voice. Officer Williams reached for her arm. "Miss, please stand up and gather your belongings." Naomi pulled her arm away gently. "Don't touch me. I'll gather my things, but don't put your hands on me unless you're arresting me for a specific crime. You're being removed for disrupting flight operations," Officer Thompson said. "What operation have I disrupted?" Naomi asked as she slowly collected her backpack and jacket. "What specific regulation have I violated? What crime have I committed, other than existing in a space where my presence makes some people uncomfortable?" Neither officer answered. As Naomi stood up from her seat, Rebecca immediately moved to block her access to the aisle. "Mr. Vale, your seat is ready." Preston moved toward 1A with obvious satisfaction, but as he passed Naomi, she spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "You're going to regret this," she said. "All of you." Preston smirked. "I doubt that, sweetheart." Dr. Martinez stood up as Naomi was escorted toward the aircraft door. "This is Dr. Sarah Martinez. I'm a physician, and I'm witnessing what appears to be illegal discrimination by Skyline Airways crew and airport security. This young woman has been completely compliant and respectful, and she's being removed solely because of her race." She spoke clearly, making sure her phone captured every word. The passenger in question, Naomi Brooks, paid over $7,000 for seat 1A, which is being given to a white male passenger who demanded it based on his perceived status with the airline. James Patterson stood as well. "I can corroborate that account. This is discrimination pure and simple." But Officer Williams was done with discussion. "Everyone needs to return to their seats so this flight can depart. Miss Brooks, you're coming with us." As they reached the aircraft door, Naomi turned back to look at the first-class cabin one more time. Preston was already settling into her seat, adjusting the reading light and reaching for the champagne that had been intended for her. Rebecca was bustling around, trying to restore normal service as if nothing unusual had happened. Captain Rodriguez had returned to his cockpit, probably hoping the whole incident would be forgotten once they were airborne. But Dr. Martinez was still recording, and James Patterson was still watching, and Lisa Reyes was looking at Naomi with an expression that seemed equal parts sympathy and shame. "This isn't over," Naomi said quietly as Officer Williams guided her toward the jet bridge. And she was right, because at that exact moment in a boardroom in Seattle, Andre Brooks was looking at his missed call notifications and realizing that something was very wrong. He had taught Naomi to call him whenever she felt unsafe or overwhelmed. In 20 years, she had used that option exactly 3 times, once when she was 12, and got lost at a shopping mall once when she was 16 and experienced the credit card incident, and once when she was 18 and a college party had gotten out of hand. Naomi didn't call for help lightly. If she had called him from the airplane, it meant something serious was happening. Andre stood up from the conference table, interrupting a presentation about aircraft financing options that could have made his company another $100 million in annual revenue. "Gentlemen," he said to the room full of aviation executives, "I need to step out for a moment. Family emergency." But as he reached for his phone to call Naomi back, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The number she had called from showed the international prefix for in-flight satellite communication systems. That meant she was calling from an airplane. More specifically, it meant she was calling from an airplane that was equipped with his company's communication systems. Andre's company didn't just own aircraft. They also provided communication, navigation, and tracking services for dozens of airlines. Every plane that used Brooks Aviation Holdings technology was monitored in real time by his company's operations center. He speed-dialed his operations manager in Detroit. "Marcus, I need you to track a call. My daughter just tried to reach me from an aircraft. I need to know which flight, which airline, and current status." Marcus Rodriguez, no relation to the captain, was one of Andre's most trusted employees, a former air traffic controller who understood both aviation operations and the technology that made them possible. "Give me 2 minutes, boss," Marcus said. Andre paced the hallway outside the boardroom, his mind racing through possibilities. Naomi was supposed to be flying from New York to London on her way back to Oxford. It should have been a routine flight, but nothing about her phone call felt routine. His phone buzzed. "Boss, I found it. Skyline Airways. Flight 447 JFK to Heathrow, Boeing 787-9. The call came from seat 1A approximately 4 minutes ago. But here's the strange thing, the aircraft is still on the ground at JFK. They were supposed to push back 20 minutes ago, but they're showing delayed for operational reasons." Andre felt his stomach drop. What kind of operational reasons, I'm not sure. But the aircraft is using our ACR's messaging system, and I'm seeing some unusual communication patterns. Multiple radio calls to ground control security notifications, that kind of thing. Andre's hands were trembling with anger. "Marcus, I want you to pull the full communication log for that aircraft. Everything. Radio calls, data messages, even the passenger manifests if you can access them. Boss, some of that might require, I don't care what it requires. That's my daughter on that plane, and something's wrong. Use every system we have access to." While Marcus worked, Andre did something he hadn't done in 20 years of business. He called his personal attorney, his director of public relations, and his head of security simultaneously on a conference call. "We may have a situation," he said without preamble. "Naomi is on a Skyline Airways flight that's being delayed for operational reasons. She tried to call me and couldn't get through. I need everyone on standby until I know what's happening." His attorney, Catherine Walsh, a woman who specialized in civil rights and aviation law, was immediately alert. "What kind of situation are you thinking? The kind that ends with lawsuits and congressional hearings? If I'm right about what I think is happening," Marcus called back. "Boss, you're not going to like this. I've got partial audio from ground control communications. It sounds like there's a passenger removal in progress. Security is involved." The conference call went silent. "Passenger removal." Catherine's voice was sharp. On what grounds? Andre was already moving toward the elevator. "I'm going to Seattle-Tacoma International. Have the jet ready for immediate departure to JFK. And Catherine, start preparing for war." "What kind of war?" Andre's voice was ice cold. "The kind that ends airlines." Back on Flight 447. Dr. Martinez watched through the aircraft windows as Naomi was escorted across the jet bridge. Her phone had captured the entire incident, and she was already uploading the video to her social media accounts. The caption read, "Watching discrimination happen in real time on Skyline Airways. Young black woman dragged from first-class seat she paid for to make room for white male passenger who has status. This is 24 people. This is still happening." Within minutes, the video had been shared dozens of times. Within an hour, it would be shared thousands of times. But Andre Brooks wasn't waiting for social media justice. He was bringing something much more immediate, much more powerful, and much more devastating than viral videos. He was bringing consequences. Dr. Martinez's finger moved across her phone screen with surgical precision, each tap deliberate and purposeful. As a cardiologist, she was accustomed to working under pressure, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. But this was different. This was about justice. The video she had just captured showed everything: Naomi's calm demeanor, Rebecca's escalating aggression, Preston's naked entitlement, and the security officer's willingness to remove a paying passenger without cause. More importantly, it showed the clear racial dynamics at play, a young black woman being displaced for an older white man who simply wanted her seat. She typed quickly, "Skyline Airways discrimination justice. Naomi Brooks deserves better. We all do." She hit share and watched as the video began uploading to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok simultaneously. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 30 minutes, Dr. Martinez's video had been viewed over 50,000 times. The comments section was a torrent of outrage support and shared experiences from people who had witnessed or experienced similar treatment. "This happened to my daughter on American Airlines," wrote one user. "I work for an airline and this is not policy. This is racism," wrote another. "Name and shame every single employee involved," demanded a third. But the most powerful responses came from people who knew exactly what they were witnessing because they had lived it themselves. Celebrity chef Marcus Johnson, who had 8 million followers across social platforms, shared the video with his own commentary. "This is why I fly private now. This is 2024, and young black women are still being told they don't belong in spaces they paid for. Unacceptable." Civil rights attorney Brian Stewart, known for his high-profile discrimination cases, quote, tweeted the video. "Everything about this removal was illegal. The crew, the security officers, and the airline are all liable for civil rights violations. This young woman has a strong case. But the most significant share came from someone unexpected. Monica Torres, a popular TikTok creator with over 12 million followers, who happened to be a former Skyline Airways flight attendant. Monica's response video, recorded in her car in the parking lot of her current job, was raw and unfiltered. "Y'all, I worked for Skyline for 3 years and I can tell you exactly what happened here," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "That girl was removed because she didn't look like what they think first-class passengers should look like. I've seen this happen before. I've been told to handle situations like this before, and I quit because I couldn't be part of a system that treats people this way." Monica's video was shared over 200,000 times in the first hour alone. Meanwhile, James Patterson had returned to his seat on Flight 447, but he couldn't concentrate on his Wall Street Journal. The image of Naomi being escorted off the plane was burned into his mind. As an investment banker, he understood power dynamics, market forces, and risk assessment better than most people. And what he had just witnessed was a massive risk that Skyline Airways apparently hadn't calculated. He pulled out his phone and opened his LinkedIn profile, where he had over 15,000 professional connections in finance, business, and corporate leadership. "Just witnessed blatant discrimination on Skyline Airways Flight 447, he wrote. "Young black woman dragged from first-class seat she paid $7,200 for to accommodate white male passenger who demanded her seat. As someone who flies 200,000 miles per year, I can tell you this was not about operational necessity. This was about racism, pure and simple. Skyline Airways should be held accountable." His post was shared by dozens of executives within the first 30 minutes, reaching decision-makers at Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries. But the most damaging response came from an unexpected source: current and former Skyline Airways employees. Flight attendant Jennifer Park, who worked the domestic routes, shared Dr. Martinez's video with her own commentary. "This is why morale is so low. We're being asked to enforce discrimination and call it customer service." Pilot David Richardson, a 20-year veteran of the airline, wrote, This crew violated company policy, federal regulations, and basic human decency. I'm embarrassed to wear the same uniform. Even passengers from other flights began sharing their own experiences. The hashtag Skyline Stories began trending as people recounted their own encounters with discriminatory treatment by the airline. Inside the Skyline Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas, the crisis was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. Communications Director Rachel Green was fielding calls from major news outlets, all asking for official statements about the incident that was rapidly going viral. CBS. "This morning wants a statement in 30 minutes, she told her assistant. CNN is leading with it on the evening news, and the Washington Post is preparing a front-page story for tomorrow's edition. But the real crisis wasn't the media attention. It was the immediate operational impact. Customer Service Supervisor Linda Chang was watching reservation cancellations pour in at an unprecedented rate. The hashtag Boycott Skyline was gaining momentum, and passengers were actively switching to competing airlines. "We've had over 300 cancellations in the past 2 hours, she reported to senior management, and our social media mentions have gone from 500 per day to over 50,000, and 98% of them are negative." The airline's stock price was already beginning to drop in after-hours trading as investors realized the potential scope of the crisis. But none of this corporate panic was visible to the passengers still sitting on Flight 447. Preston Vale was enjoying his champagne in Seat 1. Completely unaware that his behavior was being dissected and condemned by hundreds of thousands of people online. He had already forgotten about Naomi dismissing the entire incident as a minor inconvenience that had been resolved in his favor. Rebecca Walsh was going through her pre-flight checklist, trying to restore normal operations and hoping that the departure delay wouldn't result in additional scrutiny from her supervisors. Captain Rodriguez was communicating with ground control about their revised departure time, focusing on operational necessities and trying not to think about the moral implications of what had just occurred in his aircraft. But Lisa Reyes couldn't stop thinking about it. As the junior flight attendant, she had been trained to follow the lead of senior crew members and avoid contradicting their decisions. But everything about what she had witnessed felt wrong. During her training, she had been taught that passenger safety was the primary responsibility of the flight crew. She had been taught to de-escalate conflicts, not create them. She had been taught that all passengers deserved respect and professional service regardless of their appearance or background. Nothing in her training had prepared her for witnessing discrimination disguised as operational necessity. Lisa pulled out her phone and opened the anonymous employee reporting portal that Skyline Airways had implemented as part of their corporate compliance program. "Witnessed discriminatory passenger removal on Flight 447, she typed. "Paying first-class passenger removed to accommodate different passengers' seating preference." Removal appeared to be based on racial bias rather than any operational necessity. Crew violated company anti-discrimination policies. She hesitated for a moment, knowing that filing the report could lead to scrutiny of her own actions. But then she thought about Naomi's dignity under pressure and the calm way she had accepted being treated unjustly. She hit submit. The report was immediately flagged as high priority and forwarded to corporate compliance, where it would become part of a federal investigation that was already beginning to take shape. Because while social media was powerful and public outrage was growing, and corporate crisis management teams were scrambling to control the damage, there was another force at work that none of them had anticipated. Andre Brooks was no longer just a concerned father. He was a man with the resources to investigate the connections to expose and the determination to ensure that what happened to his daughter would never happen to anyone else. His private jet was already in the air, racing toward New York, with a team of attorneys, investigators, and public relations experts who specialized in corporate accountability. But more importantly, Andre was carrying something that would change everything. The detailed operational logs from the aircraft his daughter had been removed from. Because Brooks Aviation Holdings didn't just provide communication services to Skyline Airways. They also provided the data systems that tracked every passenger interaction, every crew communication, and every operational decision made on their aircraft. Andre had complete access to everything that had happened on Flight 447, from the moment Naomi boarded to the moment she was removed. And what those logs revealed was going to destroy more than just careers. It was going to destroy the entire corporate structure that had enabled the discrimination in the first place. The war was about to begin. The Gulfstream G650 cut through the evening sky like a silver bullet, carrying Andre Brooks and his team toward John F. Kennedy International Airport at nearly the speed of sound. Inside the luxurious cabin, Andre sat surrounded by laptops, legal documents, and three of the most feared corporate attorneys in the United States. Catherine Walsh, his lead counsel, was reviewing preliminary findings with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for a life-saving operation. "We have everything, Andre. Flight data, communication logs, passenger manifests, even the internal crew communications. This isn't just discrimination. It's a federal civil rights violation with documented evidence." Marcus Rodriguez, patched in via satellite from the Brooks Aviation Operations Center in Detroit, had been working non-stop to compile the data. Boss, the aircraft communication logs show that the crew never reported any safety issues, never cited any federal regulations, and never followed any established protocol for passenger removal. They created their own justification after the fact. Andre's hands were steady, but his voice carried the controlled fury of a man who had built an empire specifically to protect his family from exactly this kind of treatment. "What about the passenger they moved her for Preston Vale?" Catherine replied, reading from her notes. "Pharmaceutical executive frequent flyer, but no special status that would justify displacing a confirmed passenger. His seat assignment was valid, but so was Naomi's. The crew simply decided his comfort mattered more than her rights." The third attorney civil rights specialist, David Rodriguez, looked up from his laptop. "I've been researching the crew members involved. Rebecca Walsh has been named in 4 previous discrimination complaints over the past 3 years. All were settled quietly, all involved passengers of color, and all were buried in corporate legal files." Andre's jaw tightened. They knew. The airline knew she had a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and they kept her in a customer-facing role. "It gets worse," Marcus's voice crackled through the satellite connection. "I've accessed the ground crew communications. Airport security was told this was a belligerent passenger situation before they even boarded the aircraft. The crew lied to security to get them to remove Naomi. Catherine was already drafting legal documents on her laptop. That's conspiracy to violate civil rights, false reporting to federal officers, and fraud. We're not talking about a civil lawsuit anymore, Andre. This is criminal territory." But Andre wasn't focused on lawsuits or criminal charges. He was focused on something much more immediate and much more devastating. "Marcus, what's the tail number on that aircraft?" "N887SK Boeing 787-9. Andre smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's one of ours. We hold the lease on that specific aircraft. Skyline Airways is paying us approximately $47 million over 10 years for the right to operate that plane." The cabin fell silent as the implications sank in. "You can ground it," Catherine said, her voice filled with amazement. "You can literally strand their flagship route." "Better than that?" Andre replied. "I can terminate their lease for breach of contract. Discrimination on one of our aircraft violates the moral turpitude clause in our leasing agreement." David was already pulling up contract law on his laptop. "If you invoke the moral turpitude clause, Skyline Airways would lose not just that aircraft, but potentially their entire fleet agreement with Brooks Aviation." "How many planes are we talking about?" 43 aircraft across their international and domestic routes, Andre said quietly. "Combined value of approximately $800 million. The Gulfstream began its descent into JFK, and Andre looked out the window at the airport lights below. Somewhere down there, his daughter was being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing in a space where her presence made some people uncomfortable. Catherine, I want you to call Skyline Airways CEO Michael Harrison directly. Tell him that Andre Brooks is en route to JFK, that we have documented evidence of civil rights violations on one of our aircraft, and that he has exactly 1 hour to meet me at the airport before I start terminating contracts. Andre Catherine said carefully, if you ground their fleet, you're talking about stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers, disrupting international routes, and potentially bankrupting a major airline. Andre looked at her with eyes that had seen discrimination, fought through poverty, and built an empire from nothing but determination and refusal to accept injustice. They should have thought about that before they dragged my daughter off an airplane. Meanwhile, at JFK Airport, Naomi sat in an airport security office, still wearing her Stanford sweatshirt, still maintaining the dignity her father had taught her, but feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The security office was sterile and cold, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look washed out and unreal. Officer Williams had processed her removal as a non-compliance with crew instructions, which wasn't technically an arrest, but felt like one. Your father called, Officer Thompson said, looking uncomfortable as he realized the situation was more complicated than they had initially understood. He's apparently some kind of aviation executive. He wanted to know why you were detained. Naomi looked up with interest. What did you tell him that you were removed from the aircraft for disrupting flight operations? Officer Williams replied, though he sounded less confident than he had an hour earlier. And what did he say? The officers exchanged glances. He said we had made a mistake, and that we would understand the scope of that mistake very shortly. Before Naomi could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Baby girl, I'm landing in 20 minutes. Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there. This ends now. Back on flight 447. The atmosphere in first class had shifted dramatically. Dr. Martinez's video had gone viral, and passengers were beginning to recognize that they had witnessed something significant. James Patterson was fielding calls from colleagues who had seen his LinkedIn post. How bad was it, really asked one of his clients, a Fortune 500 CEO who was considering cutting ties with Skyline Airways. Worse than you can imagine, James replied. It was textbook discrimination, and it was captured on video from multiple angles. Preston Vale was still oblivious to the growing crisis, enjoying his champagne and checking emails about his merger meeting the following morning. But his ignorance was about to be shattered. Captain Rodriguez received a call from ground control that made him freeze in place. Skyline 447, be advised that we have a priority aircraft requesting immediate gate access. Brooks Aviation Holdings corporate jet tail number N650BA. They have requested direct communication with your crew regarding operational concerns. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Brooks Aviation Holdings was one of Skyline Airways' largest leasing partners, and Andre Brooks was personally known to every senior pilot in the airline. He was also known as someone who didn't make unscheduled flights without very serious reasons. Ground control, say again. Brooks Aviation is requesting communication with our crew. Affirmative, Skyline 447. Mr. Brooks has requested immediate contact regarding passenger removal documentation on your aircraft. Please stand by for priority communication. The radio crackled, and a voice that commanded boardrooms across 3 continents came through with crystal clarity. Captain Rodriguez, this is Andre Brooks, CEO of Brooks Aviation Holdings. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The entire cockpit fell silent. Mr. Brooks, this is Captain Rodriguez. How can we assist you, sir? You can start by explaining why my daughter was dragged off my aircraft for the crime of sitting in a seat she paid for. Rodriguez felt the blood drain from his face. Your daughter, Sir Naomi Brooks, 20 years old, Stanford University student, Oxford Exchange Program. Seat 1A, which she purchased for $7,200 3 days ago. Ring any bells? Captain. Through the cockpit door, Rodriguez could see Preston Vale still enjoying his champagne in the seat that Naomi had been forced to vacate. Sir, there was a seating discrepancy that required passenger reassignment for operational efficiency. Andre's voice was ice cold. Captain, I have the complete operational logs from your aircraft. There was no mechanical issue with any other first-class seat. There was no safety concern that required passenger movement. There was no federal regulation that necessitated reassignment. What there was, Captain, was discrimination. The radio went silent for a long moment. Captain, let me be very clear about your situation. The aircraft you're sitting in belongs to my company. The communication system you're using belongs to my company. The navigation system that will get you safely to London belongs to my company. And the legal authority that allows Skyline Airways to operate any of those systems comes from contracts that I personally negotiated. Rodriguez was sweating now. Mr. Brooks, I assure you that you assured my daughter that she would be treated with dignity and respect when she boarded your aircraft. How did that work out? Captain. Another silence. Here's what's going to happen. I am currently taxiing to a gate approximately 50 yards from your aircraft. I am accompanied by 3 attorneys, 2 federal investigators, and a team of journalists from major news outlets. In approximately 5 minutes, I am going to board your aircraft to collect my daughter's belongings and have a conversation with your crew. Rodriguez's hands were shaking. Sir, passengers are not permitted to reboard after Captain. I'm not a passenger. I'm the man who owns your airplane. And unless you want to spend the next 10 years flying cargo planes in rural Alaska, you will ensure that I receive the cooperation I require. The line went dead. Rebecca Walsh, who had been listening from the galley, looked pale. She had heard Andre Brooks' name before. Every Skyline Airways employee had heard of Andre Brooks. He was the man who could ground their entire fleet with a phone call. Preston Vale, still blissfully unaware, was reading financial news on his tablet when Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight operational delay. We need to resolve some administrative issues before departure. But Dr. Martinez, who had been monitoring the situation through news updates on her phone, looked up with interest. Administrative issues? Or is Andre Brooks about to board this aircraft? Preston looked confused. Who's Andre Brooks? James Patterson lowered his newspaper with something approaching awe. Andre Brooks is the owner of Brooks Aviation Holdings, one of the largest aviation investment firms in North America. And if he's here, it's because that young woman you had removed was his daughter. Preston's face went white. He owns this plane, Dr. Martinez added helpfully, and about 42 others that Skyline Airways operates. Preston stood up from seat 1A as if it had suddenly caught fire. Captain, he called out, his voice cracking with panic. I think there may have been a misunderstanding about the seating arrangement. But it was too late for misunderstandings. Through the aircraft windows, they could see a black Escalade pulling up to the jet bridge, followed by news vans from CNNA-BC and CBS. Andre Brooks was about to board the aircraft where his daughter had been humiliated. And he was bringing the end of careers, the destruction of reputations, and the kind of consequences that would echo through the aviation industry for decades. The reckoning had arrived. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical hiss that seemed to echo through the first-class cabin like the sound of inevitability arriving. Andre Brooks stepped aboard wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and an expression that could have melted steel. Behind him came Catherine Walsh, David Rodriguez, and a woman with a press badge who was documenting everything for the evening news. The first thing Andre saw was Preston Vale hurriedly gathering his belongings from seat 1. His earlier arrogance replaced by the panic of a man who had just realized he was drowning. The second thing he saw was Rebecca Walsh standing frozen in the galley with her mouth slightly open and her professional composure completely shattered. The third thing he saw was Dr. Martinez still holding her phone and still recording, who nodded respectfully as he passed. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "I documented everything. Your daughter conducted herself with remarkable dignity." Andre paused long enough to meet her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Captain Rodriguez appeared from the cockpit, his captain's stripes seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "Mr. Brooks, I want to assure you that Andre held up one hand, and the captain fell silent immediately. Captain, in approximately 30 years of business, I have learned that the words people speak after they've been caught matter far less than the actions they took when they thought no one was watching." He walked slowly through the first-class cabin, taking in every detail, every face, every witness to what had happened to his daughter. "Rebecca Walsh," he said, turning to face the senior flight attendant. 15 years with Skyline Airways, 4 previous discrimination complaints, 0 successful completion of sensitivity training programs, and today you physically removed a paying passenger to accommodate the preferences of another passenger based on what appears to be racial bias. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but Andre continued. "I have the complete audio and data logs from this aircraft, Ms. Walsh. I know that you told airport security this was a belligerent passenger situation before they ever boarded the plane. I know that you never consulted company policy regarding passenger removal. I know that you never documented any safety concerns or operational necessities. You simply decided that my daughter didn't belong here, and you acted on that decision." Catherine Walsh stepped forward, her legal credentials clearly visible. "Ms. Walsh, I'm Catherine Walsh representing Mr. Brooks. You are being notified that civil and criminal complaints will be filed against you personally for civil rights violations, conspiracy to violate passenger rights, and filing false reports with federal officers." Rebecca's composure cracked entirely. We had operational requirements. Mr. Vale is a preferred customer." "Mr. Vale," Andre said, turning to Preston, who was attempting to blend into the aircraft wall, had a confirmed seat assignment in 1F. "My daughter had a confirmed seat assignment in 1A. The only thing that changed was your decision that his comfort mattered more than her rights." Preston tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Brooks, I had no idea. If you had known what, that she was my daughter, that she had connections, that there would be consequences." Andre's voice was dangerously quiet. "So you're saying that if she had been any other young black woman without powerful family connections, your behavior would have been acceptable?" Preston's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Andre turned to Captain Rodriguez. "Captain, I'm declaring an operational emergency on this aircraft under the authority granted to me as the lessor of this equipment." Rodriguez looked confused. "Sir, what kind of operational emergency?" "Discrimination emergency. This aircraft is hereby grounded pending a complete investigation by federal authorities, the Department of Transportation, and our company's compliance team." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus, execute Protocol 7 on aircraft N887SK. Immediate operational suspension. Within seconds, every system on the aircraft that was provided by Brooks Aviation Holdings went into security lockdown mode. The communication system's navigation equipment and even the in-flight entertainment system displayed the same message, Aircraft Operational Authority suspended by lessor." Captain Rodriguez stared at his instrument panel in amazement. "Mr. Brooks, you can't just Captain. I suggest you read your leasing agreement more carefully. Section 15.3 specifically gives Brooks Aviation Holdings the authority to suspend operations of any aircraft being used in violation of federal civil rights law or company moral standards. This aircraft will not fly again until every employee involved in this incident has been terminated and a complete federal investigation has been completed." Dr. Martinez continued recording her phone, capturing everything for the growing audience on social media. "This is unprecedented," she said, speaking to her followers. "Andre Brooks is literally grounding a commercial aircraft to protect his daughter's civil rights. James Patterson stood up from his seat, extending his hand to Andre. "Sir, I witnessed everything that happened here. Your daughter was treated shamefully, and she handled it with more grace than these people deserved." Andre shook his hand. "Thank you for speaking up. Too often people see injustice and stay silent because it's not convenient to get involved." "Where is Naomi now?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Airport security office," Andre replied. "She's being held on charges that will be dropped within the hour, but she shouldn't have spent 1 minute in detention for the crime of occupying space that made some people uncomfortable." He turned to address the entire first-class cabin, his voice carrying to every seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your travel plans. But I want you to understand what happened here today. My daughter, a Stanford University student with a confirmed first-class ticket that she purchased with her own money, was dragged off this aircraft because some people decided that she didn't look like she belonged here. The cabin was absolutely silent. She was accused of fraud with no evidence. She was accused of disruption while remaining completely calm. She was removed by security officers who were told she was belligerent when she had never raised her voice. And she was replaced by a passenger who believed his status entitled him to someone else's seat. Preston Vale looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. This aircraft will remain grounded until Skyline Airways can demonstrate that they have addressed the culture of discrimination that made this incident possible. Your flights will be rescheduled on other carriers at Skyline Airways' expense, and I personally guarantee that every employee involved in this incident will face both legal and professional consequences." Lisa Reyes, the junior flight attendant who had filed the anonymous report, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Brooks, sir, I want you to know that I filed a complaint about what happened. What they did was wrong, and it doesn't represent what most of us believe." Andre looked at her with something approaching warmth. "What's your name, Lisa Reyes, sir? Ms. Reyes, your complaint is already part of the federal investigation file, and your willingness to speak up will be noted in your personnel record. Thank you for having the courage to do what's right." Catherine Walsh was already on her phone with the Skyline Airways executive team. "Michael Harrison needs to be at JFK within 2 hours or we start terminating aircraft leases tonight. This is not a negotiation." David Rodriguez was coordinating with federal investigators who were already en route. "We'll need passenger statements, crew interviews, and complete operational documentation. This is going to be a textbook case in civil rights law." But Andre was focused on something more immediate than legal proceedings. "Captain Rodriguez, I need the contact information for airport security. I'm going to collect my daughter, and then we're going to have a conversation about how this gets resolved." Sir Rodriguez said carefully, "What kind of resolution are you looking for?" Andre smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The kind that ensures this never happens to anyone else. Ever." Meanwhile, news of the grounded aircraft was spreading through the aviation industry like wildfire. Other airlines were frantically reviewing their own policies and training programs, knowing that Brooks Aviation Holdings could just as easily terminate their leasing agreements if similar incidents occurred. Skyline Airways' stock price was in freefall as investors realized that Andre Brooks could theoretically ground their entire fleet, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers and bankrupting the company. Social media was exploding with updates from passengers on other Skyline Airways flights who were demanding to know if their aircraft would also be grounded. Skyline Grounded was trending worldwide with over 2 million mentions in the past hour alone. But the most significant impact was happening in corporate boardrooms across the aviation industry, where executives were asking themselves a simple question. If Andre Brooks could ground an aircraft to protect his daughter's civil rights, what else could he do? The answer was almost anything. Brooks Aviation Holdings didn't just lease aircraft. They provided financing for airline expansion, consulting for route development, and technology services for flight operations. Andre Brooks had relationships with suppliers, manufacturers, and regulatory agencies that could make or break aviation companies, and he had just demonstrated that he was willing to use every bit of that power to ensure that discrimination had consequences. As Andre left the aircraft to collect Naomi from airport security, Preston Vale finally found his voice. "This is going to ruin me," he said to no one in particular. Dr. Martinez looked up from her phone where she was reading news coverage of the incident. "Good," she said simply. "It should." Rebecca Walsh was crying now, the reality of losing her career finally sinking in. "I never meant for it to go this far." James Patterson shook his head. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just didn't expect there to be consequences." Captain Rodriguez was still staring at his disabled instrument panel, trying to understand how one discriminatory act had led to the complete grounding of his aircraft. But Lisa Reyes understood perfectly. "Actions have consequences," she said quietly. "We just haven't been holding the right people accountable for the right actions." Outside the aircraft, Andre Brooks was walking across the tarmac with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested the war was far from over. He had grounded one aircraft and ruined several careers. Now he was going to reshape an entire industry. The reunion between Andre and Naomi took place in a sterile airport conference room, away from the cameras and reporters that had gathered outside. For the first time since the ordeal began, Naomi's composure finally cracked, and she allowed herself to be held by her father, while the weight of everything she had endured settled on her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, though she had nothing to apologize for. "Baby girl, you have nothing to be sorry for," Andre replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You handled yourself with perfect dignity. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry that you had to go through this." Catherine Walsh gave them privacy for a few moments, then gently interrupted. "Andre, we need to discuss our strategy. Skyline Airways CEO. Michael Harrison is en route, and federal investigators are already reviewing the evidence we've provided." Andre looked at his daughter, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the strength that had carried her through the crisis. "Naomi, how do you want this to end?" It was the question that would shape everything that followed. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the humiliation she had experienced, but also about Dr. Martinez standing up for her, about James Patterson speaking truth about Lisa Reyes filing a report even when it might cost her job. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," she said finally. "I don't want revenge. I want change." Andre smiled with genuine pride. "Then that's what we'll do." 3 hours later, Michael Harrison arrived at JFK looking like a man who understood that his company's survival hung in the balance. The CEO of Skyline Airways had built his career on operational efficiency and customer service excellence, but nothing had prepared him for the scope of the crisis he was facing. The meeting took place in a private conference room at the airport with Andre, Naomi, Catherine Walsh, and David Rodriguez on one side of the table, and Harrison with his own legal team on the other. Mr. Brooks Harrison began, "I want to personally apologize for what happened to your daughter. This incident does not represent the values or standards of Skyline Airways." Andre's response was measured but direct. "Mr. Harrison, your employee, Rebecca Walsh, had 4 previous discrimination complaints that were all settled quietly. Your crew violated federal regulations, company policy, and basic human decency, and your immediate response was to cover it up rather than address it, so I'm not sure your apology addresses the underlying problem." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "What would you like us to do?" Naomi leaned forward. "We want structural changes that ensure this can't happen again. Not just to me, but to anyone." Catherine Walsh slid a document across the table. "Our demands are outlined here. Complete termination of all employees involved in the incident. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff conducted by independent civil rights organizations. creation of an independent passenger advocacy office with real authority to investigate complaints, and establishment of a $50 million fund to support civil rights education and aviation diversity programs. Harrison's legal team huddled together, whispering frantically. The demands were significant, but the alternative, having Andre Brooks terminate their aircraft leases, would be catastrophic. "We can agree to the personnel changes and training programs," Harrison said carefully, "but $50 million is less than the cost of replacing the aircraft we could ground," Andre replied smoothly, "and far less than the cost of the federal investigation and civil rights lawsuits that will follow if we can't reach an agreement." David Rodriguez placed another document on the table. "We've also prepared a consent decree that would place Skyline Airways under federal oversight for civil rights compliance. The Department of Justice has already expressed interest in pursuing this route if voluntary compliance isn't possible. The negotiations continued for 4 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Andre Brooks had too much leverage, and Skyline Airways had too much to lose. By midnight, they had reached an agreement that would fundamentally change how the airline operated. Rebecca Walsh was terminated immediately, along with the security officers and Captain Rodriguez. Preston Vale was banned from all Skyline Airways flights for life, and his company's corporate travel contract was terminated. But the most significant changes were structural. Every Skyline Airways employee would undergo 40 hours of bias training conducted by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the NAACP. The airline would establish an independent office of passenger advocacy, staffed by civil rights attorneys with the authority to investigate and resolve discrimination complaints. And the $50 million Naomi Brooks Foundation would provide scholarships for underrepresented students in aviation engineering and civil rights law. The settlement was announced at a press conference the following morning, with Naomi standing beside her father as he addressed the assembled media. "Yesterday, my daughter was discriminated against simply for existing in a space where some people thought she didn't belong," Andre said. "Today, we're announcing changes that will ensure no passenger faces that kind of treatment again." Naomi stepped to the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "What happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unique. Every day, people are told they don't belong in spaces they've earned access to. The difference is that I had the privilege of a father with resources to fight back. Today's agreement ensures that everyone will have that protection regardless of their family connections." The impact extended far beyond Skyline Airways. Within a week, Delta, American United, and Southwest had all announced their own enhanced civil rights training programs. The hashtag Dignity at Altitude became a rallying cry for passenger rights advocates, and Congress announced hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation. Dr. Sarah Martinez used her platform to advocate for bystander intervention training, helping passengers understand how to safely document and report discrimination when they witnessed it. James Patterson became a vocal advocate for corporate accountability, speaking at business conferences about the responsibility of executives to speak up when they witnessed injustice. Lisa Reyes was promoted to senior flight attendant and became a trainer for the new bias awareness programs, helping other employees understand how to recognize and prevent discrimination. But the most significant change was cultural. The aviation industry, which had long operated under informal hierarchies based on appearance, wealth, and social status, was forced to confront the reality that dignity was not negotiable and respect was not a privilege to be granted or withdrawn. 6 months later, Naomi returned to Oxford to complete her studies, but her focus had shifted. She changed her major to civil rights law and began working with international human rights organizations to address discrimination in transportation systems worldwide. Andre continued to run Brooks Aviation Holdings, but he also established the Brooks Institute for Transportation Justice, a think tank focused on ensuring equal access to mobility regardless of race, gender, or economic status. The Naomi Brooks Foundation provided its first scholarships 9 months after the incident, supporting 50 students from underrepresented communities who were pursuing careers in aviation engineering and civil rights law. 1 year after Flight 447, Naomi was invited to speak at the International Aviation Rights Conference in Geneva. Her speech, titled "The Right to Dignity at Any Altitude," became a foundational document for passenger rights advocates worldwide. "What I learned that day," she told the assembled delegates, "is that discrimination thrives in the silence of good people who choose comfort over courage. But when we decide that dignity matters more than convenience, when we choose to speak up rather than stay silent, we don't just protect ourselves, we protect everyone who comes after us." The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. But perhaps the most powerful moment came 18 months later, when Naomi boarded Skyline Airways Flight 447 for the first time since the incident. She was returning to Oxford from Christmas break with her family, and she had specifically requested seat 1A, the same seat from which she had been removed. The captain was Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the previous captain, a Latina woman who had been promoted as part of Skyline Airways' new diversity initiative. The senior flight attendant was Marcus Thompson, a young black man who had graduated from one of the Naomi Brooks Foundation scholarship programs. "Welcome aboard," Ms. Brooks, Captain Rodriguez announced over the intercom. "We're honored to have you flying with us today, and we want you to know that this aircraft operates under a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." As the plane pushed back from the gate, Naomi looked around the first-class cabin, which was more diverse than it had ever been before. The changes initiated by her experience had created opportunities for people who had never before seen themselves represented in premium travel spaces. Dr. Martinez, who had become a friend and occasional travel companion, was seated across the aisle. "How does it feel to be back?" she asked. Naomi smiled, putting on her noise-canceling headphones and settling in for the flight. "It feels like justice," she said simply. As Flight 447 lifted off from JFK, carrying her toward her future, Naomi Brooks closed her eyes and finally got the peaceful flight she had originally sought. The sky belonged to everyone now, she had made sure of that. Sometimes justice doesn't roar with vengeance. Sometimes it whispers with quiet dignity. And sometimes it simply takes its rightful seat and changes the world from 30,000 feet. The story of Flight 447 became a case study in business schools, law schools, and civil rights organizations worldwide. It demonstrated that discrimination has costs that extend far beyond the immediate victims, and that true accountability requires more than apologies. It requires structural change. But for Naomi Brooks, the real victory wasn't in the settlements or the policy changes or the media attention. It was in the knowledge that her willingness to stand her ground with grace had opened doors for everyone who would follow in her path. And as she pursued her law degree and prepared for a career fighting injustice wherever she found it, she carried with her the lesson her father had taught her from childhood. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not a favor. And every space you've earned the right to occupy is a space where you belong completely. If this story of courage, dignity, and justice moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these important stories with more people who need to hear them. And make sure to subscribe to our channel because we have many more powerful stories coming your way about ordinary people who refused to accept injustice and changed the world because of it. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they belong in every space they've earned the right to occupy. Drop a comment below and let us know, have you ever witnessed discrimination like this? How did you respond? Your voice matters, and your story could inspire others to stand up when it matters most. We'll see you in the next video where we continue to celebrate the power of dignity, the importance of justice, and the incredible things that happen when ordinary people decide that enough is enough. Until then, remember you belong wherever you've earned the right to be, and no one has the power to make you smaller than you are.